I've spent 10 years in the Marine Corps, 4 years working with the Air Force as a civilian, doing experimental testing on aircraft. Since my Marine Corps days, I was a pilot in the service and a fighter pilot, and fought in World War II after the latter part of World War II and the Korean War conflict. After I got out of the Marine Corps, I took a job with the Air Force at Wright-Patterson, doing experimental flight testing on various different modifications and tech orders that they had incorporated into aircraft, various different aircraft, F-89, back then the B-47, F-102, and those aircraft. While I was at Wright-Patterson, of course, I was approached by an individual that, and I'm not going to mention his name, to determine if I wanted to work in an area on just new creative things, okay? And apparently that was the flying disc simulator. What they had done, they had selected several of us, and they reassigned me to Link Aviation, which was a simulator manufacturer. At that time, they were building what they call the C-11B and F-102 simulator, B-47 simulator, and so forth. And they wanted us to get the experience before we actually started work on the flying disc simulator, which I spent 30-some years working on. The simulator wasn't actually functional until around 1958, where the simulator was actually operable. Craft that they used to build, which is a 30-meter one, was the one that crashed in Arizona, Kingman, Arizona, back in 53 or 52. I think it was 53. That's the one they used. That's the first one that they took out to the test site. It landed about 15 miles from, which used to be an Army air base, which is now a defunct Army base. I forget, I can't recall the name of it. But that particular craft, there were some problems with, number one, getting it on the flatbed to take it up to Area 51. They couldn't get it across the dam because of the road. It had to be barged across the Colorado River at the time, and then taken up to where people go now, up 93, out to Area 51, which was just being really constructed at the time, and taken down those dirt roads and out to that particular area of the test site. There were 4 aliens aboard that thing, and those aliens went to Los Alamos, and they put certain people in there with them, people that were astrophysicists, just general scientists, to ask them questions. The way the story was told to me was there was only one of them that would talk to any of these scientists that they put in the lab with them. Only one of the aliens. The rest wouldn't talk to anybody, or even have a conversation with them. First they thought it was all ESP, or what do I want to say?
Telepathy?
Yeah, mental telepathy. But most of that is kind of a joke to me, because they actually speak. Maybe not like we do, but they actually speak and can converse. The difference between this aircraft or this disc and other discs that they had looked at was that it was much simpler design. In the simulator, there was one big thing different. The thing that, like Lazar calls the reactor. Okay, we didn't have a reactor. We had a space in a thing that looked like the reactor, but that wasn't the thing we operated the simulator with. We operated with 6 large capacitors that were charged with 1,000,000 volts each. Say there were 6 million volts in those capacitors. They're largest capacitors ever built. these particular capacitors, they last for 30 minutes. So you could get in there and actually work the controls and do what you had to get the aircraft or get the simulator, the disk to operate, okay? Actually, when it was operable, it would lift off the ball about a certain amount there was a dimension there that we had that it actually lifted up, and it could actually turn, you know, a certain amount of degrees left to right or whatever. In a simulator now, you'll notice that there are no seat belts, right? And the same thing with the actual craft, no seat belts. You don't need seat belts, because when you fly one of these things upside down, there's no upside down like in a regular aircraft. You just don't feel it. You have your own gravitational field right inside. So if you're flying upside down, to you, you're right side up. There weren't any windows. The only place we had any visibility at all, and it was done with cameras or video type things at that time, was in the turret section. It takes a lot of time because of the area and the smallness of it. Just to raise your hand, it becomes complicated. You have to be trained with your mind, you know, to accept what you're going to actually feel and
so there's
and
some
experience.
perceptual distortion.
There's a lot of distortion.
Yeah.
Seeing, just moving about. It's a. After a while, after you get used to it and all, and you do it, it's simple. You got to know where everything is, you know, and you got to understand what's going to happen to your body. It's no different than, you know, accepting the G-forces, you know, when you're flying a aircraft or coming out of a dive, you know, and that kind of thing. It's a whole new ballgame.
Did our flight crews ever take one of these discs out into space?
You know, I don't know that. I don't really know that. I'm sure they have. I'm saying it probably took a while to train enough of the people or sufficient time. The whole big problem with the disc is that it's so exacting in its design and so forth, and it can't be used, it can't be used as a like we use aircraft today with dropping bombs and you know, having machine guns, you know, in the wings and that kind of stuff. The design is so exacting that you can't add anything. You can't. It's got to be just right. There's a big problem in the design of where things are put. Say, you know, where the center of the aircraft is and that type of thing. Even the fact that we raised it 3 feet so the taller guys could get in and stuff. The actual ship was extended back to its original configuration, but actually raised. We had a long period of introduction into meeting, you know, say an EVE, an alien. And I called him J-Rod. Of course, that's what they called him, but that wasn't his, you know, I don't know if that was his real name or not, but that's the name that the linguist gave him, you know. So he knew J-Rod, you know. And I did draw a sketch of him when he was, before I left him in a meeting, but, and I provided it to some people, but that was my impression of what I saw. He'd sound just like, if you spoke, he'd sound like you. You know, he's like one of the, you know, a parrot, you know, but he'd try and answer your question, you know. A lot of times you'd have a hard time understanding, you know, because if you didn't put it on paper and explain yourself, half the time he couldn't give you a good answer. Well, the preparation was, you know, basically going through. First of all, I went to all of the different nationalities in the world, right? Just, you know, these, whatever, you know.
Human nationalities.
Yeah, human nationalities, you know. Then they got into going into other forms of life, you know, even down to, you know, animals and that type of thing. And the fact that, you know, this J-Rod had, his skin was pinkish, but a little bit rough, you know, and that kind of stuff. Not, you know, not horrible looking, you know, or to me, he didn't look horrible looking. Some of the guys, you know, that was in the particular groups that I was in, they never even made it, you know, as far as I was concerned. You know, when they gave you the psychological question, you know, I just answered them the way I felt, and I had no problem, you know. And that's what they wanted to know. You know, if you'd become, like, you know, hey, here's an alien, he's from here, and I don't know what, you know, one of those kind of things, you know. But it never bothered me, you know, it didn't amount to much.
So what kind, you know what kind of scientific advice he would give the crew that was building or back engineering these?
Basically, it was only engineering advice or science advice. You know, say for example, I performed the calculation, and there's I spoke of a book that, it's not a book, it's a big assembly of various different divisions of, on gravitational technology, okay? And the key element in there, all the information wasn't there, because even our guys, our people that were the top mathematicians and stuff, couldn't figure some of this stuff out. So we would take it, and then, you know, we'd have to, with each design, you know, there's a requirement for calculations, and we'd have to prove by calculations, you know, that this thing's going to operate. No different than anything else we do. And sometimes you get into a spot where you try and try and try, and even if you use the formulas to come up with this thing that they'd provide you, it wouldn't work. And that's where he'd come in, you know, to tell him to look at this and see what we did wrong. The last 40 years or so, or 60 years, maybe there's, I'd say 40 years anyway, not counting the simulators, I'm talking about actual craft, there's probably maybe 2 or 3 dozen, various different sizes.
That we've built, or that we have that
we built.
Okay.
I don't know much about the ones that, you know, that they brought here. I know about that one out of Kingman, but that's about it. And I know the company that hauled it out of there and who's out here now. A couple of different versions that they used. One was a chemical version, one was a solid version. And I don't even know the chemistry of the chemical version. But there's one that operates with under chemicals, with certain chemicals. Actually, what they've done with, I think, with these triangles that people have seen is they've got like 2 or 3 of, say, 30-meter crafts that are in the center of it. And the outside perimeter, you know, you could put anything you want as long as these particular ones meet the design criteria, and they'll operate. Then it's more or less all that other stuff on the outside is tag along. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure if they put a large weapon up there and fired it, it would probably, you know, not work, or they'd kill themselves. There are certain reasons for the secrecy. I could understand that, no different than, you know, the first atomic bomb that they built. But, you know, they're getting so far ahead now with aircraft design, and people have come up and they're visualizing and seeing some of the design aspects that are put in some of the aircraft today. And eventually, I'm saying, like I told you gentlemen earlier, that 2003, most of this stuff will be out in everybody's plate to look at. Maybe not the way that everybody expects it, but in some manner they determine appropriate, you know, to show everybody, hey, look at what we got.
So
big surprise.
you think this is the year 2000 that we're doing this interview. So you think within 3 years that the public will be told
Well, I
something
said
about
this years ago, 2003. And the reason why I said that, the document I signed ends in 2003.
And you're not the only one that signed.
And I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
See, this I call it FOGIT, or that's what they call it, fundamentals of gravitational, techniques basically. But it's a volume. Now, I'm sure that manual now is just expanded. We're no different than anything else that they build for design criteria, because anything we do today, we have to have a design criteria manual, and they put all the information in that. And if you ever get one of these volumes of these documents, you'd be on top of the world. Got out of the service. I worked for the government, as a test pilot on various different particular aircraft. While I did that particular activity, I was asked if I wouldn't mind working on some simulators, and I thought that was a good idea, good for my future, so I did. We were then reassigned. It was just not myself, there were several other fellows like myself, engineers, that were reassigned to certain companies here in the United States on the various different simulators that they were making for the various new aircrafts that they were building. For example, the F-89, F-94, and F-102, and a group of others. We spent probably close to 3.5, 4 years just in training on simulators, and just exactly, how a simulator, an actual simulator for these aircraft worked, and the new designs as they came along. After they thought that we were trained sufficiently, then we were asked to do another project, which was more or less in my field as mechanical design. That was to join metal together without glue, nuts, or any adhesives, so forth, for aircraft purposes. The indication was to make the aircraft lighter. Okay. This course was several years going on. In the meantime, of course, security classifications were going on, as far as we were concerned, and just the individuals that were going to work on these particular projects before going to the actual facility where I had done this activity. We developed this particular process of joining this material. It took quite some time, over a period of about 4 years. And then it was indicated to us that we'd go on a special project in New Mexico, which we did. And it was about 3 or 4 years after we had gotten there that we found out that these were simulators that we would be engineers on simulators for flying discs. Those one particular project I worked on associated with that disc was several years, of course. It's very time-consuming in a translation of scientific data as provided to us by the grays, a specific type of gray. As this information was given to our scientists and various different engineers that we had no association with, but they were doing what they call a copy engineering. The copy engineering was a process where they had taken an item or a portion of the craft, and they were disassembling it, writing their procedures, and identifying certain things as they took it apart and how it related to from their science to our science, and could we use that. I spoke in a little lecture here a while back that no average pilot could fly a flying disc because it was so complicated and so foreign to the individual pilot that there would be no way that he'd be able to hop in one, even if they gave it to him and said, here, fly this. Consequently, what we did, we took their avionics and transferred it to our science and our technology and used the avionics that we know of as far as aircraft is concerned. basic principles in all this, as far as the avionics was concerned, was no different than a regular aircraft that we have. If you understand that, say for example, a fighter aircraft, it's much different than a flying disc. There were certain situations that we had to resolve, and basically we only looked at a couple different things, because the flying disc only flies in about 3 different positions, and that is at 65 degrees, flat horizontal, and possibly vertical. But it was very difficult to fly vertical. The avionics that we developed for that was for the 65 degrees, pitch and yaw, and flat flight.
Did you ever see a disc by yourself?
I saw a disc from a distance,
Can you describe
not
it?
up close.
Can you describe it?
If I was describing a disc for you so you'd understand what we're looking at, if you did see the Bob Lazar poster, very, very similar. This facility I was worked at is I'd say, as far as secrecy is concerned, is much tighter than possibly even Nellis here and some of the other facilities, you know, in this country. The entrance and the locations and the scenario on say, hey guys, you know, here this is, you know, this is what the ship looks like. It's, okay, that's what the ship looks like. As far as entering the ship, no. But that was a disc.
How far away was it?
Oh, I was, say, 10 or 15 feet away.
Was it flying or standing on the ground?
It was just sitting on the ground, on its belly.
What did you feel in the moment when you saw it? What was your impression of it?
I had, my impression was, as an engineer, was just great.
Have you ever seen any aliens?
We were introduced to grays that were associated with the project, but they were, I could say that in the time that I spent, maybe I've seen the grays a half a dozen times or more, but no more than 10 times, I think. But they were on, the reason that we saw them was actually for us to get used to being associated with them, okay? It's no different than, say, going to Africa and seeing a bunch of pygmies and, you know, looking at those people for a while, and then, you know, this is a little different than that, but it's the same situation where you're seeing something that's a little bit different than us sitting in this room, you know, talking right now, with their features and their makeup and that kind of thing.